The Kuznetsov trade talks continue.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, including the SiriusXM app and on YouTube. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And the best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. In today's episode of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the continued trade buzz surrounding Evgeny Kuznetsov. Yes, it doesn't seem to be going away. Is there any truth to any of it? We'll talk about that in the show. Then enter the KHL talks into the mix. As if it wasn't muddied enough, thinking if, Kuzy could get traded out to another NHL team, all of a sudden there's rumors surrounding his opportunities or chances of going to the KHL. And then just to get it going here, we will talk about Ovi on Kuzy and trade talks. And then in the last segment, I'll talk briefly about why I had to step away from the show for a few days. But just to get it going here, we will talk about Ovechkin and his thoughts on Evgeny Kuznetsov. As we know, they are fellow Russian countrymen, and he holds him in kind regard. And one of the things that Ovechkin said is, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to what is being said in social media. I don't pay attention to that. I know what kind of player he is. And he said, in hockey, you can play on one team 1 minute, another team the next minute, and then the minute after that, even another team. And it's all a business at the end of the day. But if it was up to him, he would like to keep Kuznetsov on this team. And one of the things not to overlook in all of this is we know that the Capitals missed the playoffs for the first time in quite some time. So everyone is about cutting ties with a lot of different players, and most notably Evgeny Kuznetsov, as it had been rumored and kind of substantiated by Mike Vogel that he did say that he wanted out of DC. There was some discontent as far as, his playing time and maybe not being on the same page with Peter Laviolette. It's always been my belief in all of this that they should give him another look under Spencer Carbery, a different coach altogether. We've seen this before. If you saw how good Kuznetsov played under Barry Trotz, for example, you know that there is a noticeable difference just based on coaching styles and different play formations, that kind of thing. So I think that it would be worthwhile to give him a look under Spencer Carbery. But just to take a look at Ovi's thoughts here, he's a close friend of mine, a great person, a great teammate, says the captain of the Capitals, Alex Ovechkin. And you know that his weight goes a long ways. It's not just, it's idle chatter when it comes to Ovechkin. He is the captain of the team. So when he says certain things, you got to kind of take stock in it a little bit more. Ovechkin said via a Russian state-owned news agency that he hopes Kuzy doesn't end up getting traded amid ongoing speculation and rumored tensions between him and the front office. And I think for me, everything that I've kind of seen is the tension was more between him and Peter Laviolette, like I talked about. So I don't know if it was necessarily about tensions between the Capitals as a whole, but more against him and Lavi. So I think that's what it would be, a good thing to get a good look under Carbery. I don't have any information about Kuzy's trade situation, Ovi said. How would I react to a trade? This is a business of hockey. Today you're here, tomorrow you're somewhere else. This piece in the Hockey News, and he's seen it before. He's seen many key players come and go through the Caps. He's seen it around the NHL. He's been here quite some time. He knows what's going on. Of course, Kuzy is coming off what general manager Brian McClellan called a disappointing season in which he had 55 points in 81 games, marking his lowest scoring rate in over a decade. His shooting percentage also plummeted to a career low 7%. Just a season before, he put up 78 points in 79 games and was among the NHL's all-stars. And that's one of the things that I really don't want to get lost in all of this talk is a couple seasons ago, he rounded out the Caps in top three in goals. Wilson, Ovechkin, and Kuznetsov. Has he had a bumpy ride? Is he a quirky guy? Of course. This is one of the guys that Kuznetsov said about himself that I could be the greatest player in the NHL. I just don't necessarily want to put in the work. But if we take a look at him historically, we talked about in the 22-23 season, 12 goals, but in 21-22, 24 goals. Then you had the COVID years there. But if you take a look back to 18, 19, 21 goals, the high water mark for Kuznetsov as far as goals scored was the 17-18 season where he scored 27 goals. So I think that, intrinsically in his fiber, his pedigree, he has what it takes to be a really great hockey player if he chooses to be. It'll be interesting to see how he gels under Spencer Carbery, like I've talked about in this episode. But another thing to consider is for the longest time, and if you're an everydayer and someone that's followed the Caps for quite some time, what is one of the things that the Caps have said for the longest time they need is a really solid second line center. Evgeny Kuznetsov was drafted in the first round. It's not like he is this, piece that should get moved out because he's not playing well. He has the history of being a really great hockey player. He historically has been held in high regard in the Capitals organization. He has just lost his way as of late. It'll be interesting, like I say, to see what kind of Kuzy we end up getting next season, because I guess we ultimately don't know. But this, like I talked about, Mike Vogel reported this summer that Kuzy did, in fact, request a trade, though number 92 said that it was not quite true and that 95% of speculation surrounding him has been superficial. I think that he thought he was speaking under conditions of anonymity when he was speaking with Russian media source there. And they were looking for clicks, the very thing that Kuzy accused the media of. And they were trying to do that to generate talk about, Kuzy getting traded out of DC. My belief on it has always been, if you can get a really great return on someone like Kuznetsov, of course, but there is never a situation for me that you should want to get a prospect or someone that's not NHL ready or less quality. And I think that if that trade was going to happen, it would have happened around free agency. Everyone speculated that it was going to happen. And, like a term I always use or a thing I say is everyone else can see the back of Kuznetsov's hockey card. They know he's inconsistent at times. But he also has a big contract, and not a lot of people are probably going to want to take that on, especially for a player that has, the potential of being one of the greatest hockey players in the NHL, but chooses not to be. Those are his words, not mine. Kuznetsov said his agent has been in touch with the team as they wait for what's next, while McClellan has reportedly been pushing hard to make a move to change up for the top six, though trade talks haven't panned out yet. Washington is remaining aggressive going into the season. That's what we can hope for, is that there is a big move to address the top six, because as it stands right now, Pacioretty, Joel Edmondson, it doesn't evoke a lot of things that are going to create confidence in me in this Caps team going into next season. I know there could be a player down in Hershey that could really step up and catch us by surprise. Maybe McMichael is going to come into camp and just both guns blazing and impress everyone. But we're talking about a Metro division that has gotten exponentially better. Have the Capitals got exponentially better? I think that you would really have to be drinking over optimistic Kool-Aid to think that, but we hope for nothing but great things from this team, and I await a big move. I ultimately think there is a move coming here at some point. It just remains to be seen who that is and what kind of upgrade will the Capitals get. All right, so coming up here, we will talk about, it's not just talks about him getting traded to another NHL team. Enter the KHL into the chat. I'll talk about that coming up. Football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get the bonus bets for every victory. You can use those bonus bets on spreads, player props, over unders, and more. And even if you're not into the game that you're watching, if you have a little bit of money on it, it makes watching the game that much more exciting. So visit fanduel.com/locked on to start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's fanduel.com/locked on. Check it out today. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure and subscribe and follow Locked On Capitals wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. A lot of great guests lined up for you this summer, not to mention that training camp isn't that far away. So subscribe to Locked On Capitals today. In this next segment here, we are going to talk about the Kuznetsov trade rumblings, and we thought for a while it's just going to be rumblings about NHL teams, but all of a sudden there is speculation about the KHL and how they potentially might want in on the action. What would that mean for the Capitals? What would that mean for Kuznetsov? It's an interesting thing to talk about here. According to Sammy Silver of the Hockey News, the 31-year-old returned to his hometown in Russia and seemingly reconnected with his former KHL team. Tractor president Alexei Texler was asked about Kuznetsov potentially ditching the final 2 seasons of his current NHL contract, and as expected, wouldn't comment on a player under NHL contract. He was, however, very complimentary of the forward and his love and dedication for the organization. So an interesting move there if that was to take place, if he would actually ditch the remainder of his contract to play over in Russia. I think that he would probably be giving up on a substantial amount of money doing that. So it'd be an interesting move. It would be, shooting yourself in the foot, in my estimation, to walk away from the money that you would have with the Capitals in favor of going and playing over in Russia. And I'm going to be, in all transparency, honest with you. I don't know what the average KHL contract goes for, but I have a feeling that it is probably quite a bit less than what he would be making with the Capitals or the NHL in general. And if not, why do so many Russian players want to come over from Russia and play in American hockey? That would be the question. So some interesting things there. I guess that's reading into things a little bit, that he reconnected with his former team over in Russia there. The fact that he was complimentary of his play, his former coach over in Russia, I guess doesn't raise my eyebrows too much. I think that he is a great player when he wants to be. That is the talk in this episode, is when he wants to be. How do the Capitals want, and how do they get Kuznetsov to want to play well, like one of the best in the NHL? It's a tough question. I think that he has it within him to be that great hockey player. He just has to want to do it. So this talk that we're hearing from this piece here in the NHL trade talks and Sammy Silver of the Hockey News is more, I don't think anything more than just the fact that he was talking with his former team. And if something like that materialized, I would be most surprised if Kuzy walked away from his NHL contract in favor of playing in the KHL. And I don't think that that would be in the Capitals' best interest. I think they should do their due diligence to try to make it right with Kuzy, whatever that happens to be. Reassure him that he has a really a spot on this team, and that, I know that you necessarily didn't maybe mesh with our former coach, but now there's a new coach at the helm in Spencer Carbery. Why don't you go ahead and give him another look? And then there's other trade talks out there as well, as Frank Saravalli of the Daily Faceoffs Rundown podcast. The possibility of a trade involving Kuznetsov exists, though it might not be the most probable scenario. Saravalli acknowledged that the Caps seem eager to explore options for moving him, and the club's recent deals have only added to the speculation surrounding the team's game plan. Amidst roster uncertainty, the Caps have taken steps to maintain their competitive edge, signing Tom Wilson, we know, to that 7-year deal. They also signed Max Pacioretty and Joel Edmondson. That said, their overall strategy appears less clear when you look at the rest of the division and what they've done, and it's not obvious. The Caps are playoff contenders. The Caps' hesitancy to make further significant changes leaves analysis and fans pondering their intentions for the upcoming season. What are some of the things that we know about the Capitals? That they are not going to make any huge moves until Alex Ovechkin hangs up the skates, potentially 3 years from now. I know he could always sign an extension. So it's my belief that the Capitals are not going to just mail it in for the next 3 years and say, hey, we're going to do what we can do and make these small moves. You got to think that Ted Leonsis, the owner of this franchise, is going to say, he's going to hold Brian McClellan accountable and say, we're not going to be stinking up the place. We need to sell out Capital One Arena. We can't have empty seats everywhere. We need to have a winning product. And I think that he holds all of his teams and their GMs accountable. You take a look at the Wizards as well, that they made changes, and he wasn't willing to accept lackluster performance with the Wizards either. So I think that, big changes will come, and I don't think that this team will wander out in the wilderness for too long. A big move is coming. I really believe it. I take a look at my phone and I'm like, well, nothing happened today, but something is going to happen between now and the start of the season. Who that player is and what it's going to take, that is, a bit more of the difficult part, because we don't want to move, a big name prospect out. And there's a lot of players on this team that Capitals fans are in love with. Like if you heard that they traded Backstrom or Oshie or Carlson or someone of that ilk, as Caps fans, how would you feel about that? Would you be happy with a move like that if it meant the Capitals got on paper what would appear to be a great return? Those are the tough questions to ask going forward. And then there's a certain comfort level as well with Ovi and the players that are on this team. And that's why I say, again, just to wrap up this segment here, I don't see the Capitals moving on from Evgeny Kuznetsov. And as far as the trade talk, or the movement of him going out to the KHL, at this point, I just think it's talk. It would be most surprising to me if Kuzy walked away from his last, year or two here with the Capitals under contract and went over to the KHL. It would be most surprising to me. He would be leaving a lot of money on the table. And I ultimately just don't see that happening. All right. So coming up here, we will talk about Kuznetsov and what he thinks about all the trade buzz. Yes, he has his comments of his own. What did he have to say? We'll talk about that straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. In this following segment here, we are going to talk about Kuzy and what his thoughts are. And, what does he think of all these rumblings about, I'm getting traded here, I'm getting traded there. He says, to be honest, I learned about it myself from the press, Kuznetsov said. And that's what he said. A lot of the times he said that people were just doing this to create clicks on social media, like I talked about in the first segment there. But the way he looks at it is, I haven't heard him comment on what his thoughts are playing under Spencer Carbery. You think that would change his perception and his, willingness to want to work with the Capitals, as Peter Laviolette's not here, and it's kind of a well-known fact that those two were kind of sandpaper personalities against each other. So I think that, for him to want to cut ties with the Caps would be most surprising. Ultimately, Kuznetsov is trying not to focus on the talks and is stressing the importance of training as he looks to bounce back, while starting and stating that 95% of these rumors are superficial. Still, he hasn't ruled out the possibility that he could be on the move. He does have a no trade clause that lists 10 teams that he can decline a trade to. So one of the things that Kuzy said here is, I tried to separate myself from it. There are agents that are in touch with Washington, are doing their work. The club is constantly trying to improve the lineup. If possible, I will be traded or someone else. I think nothing here depends on me. And that's kind of, I think, Kuzy trying to sell himself a little bit short. He does play a key role in this team. I think that he has the potential historically of being a great player. And if you remember, before he came over here, there was all this buzz surrounding, when is Kuznetsov going to come over here? And now we're willing to just discard him like a piece of trash. I think that that is a bit short sighted. My task is to train and be in the best shape no matter where I start the season. I will need to improve, and I need to prove to the team that I can play and be useful. This piece in the Hockey News. And that's what all players need to do. It's, what have you done for me lately? You can't say, well, you need to keep me on this team because I was, first round draft pick so many years ago. That doesn't mean anything. How did you play the last game, the last season, the season before that, and where are you right now? Obviously, we're not playing hockey right now, so we can't really assess where he's at right now. But I've heard talk that he's, before Dmitry Orlov got traded out to the Hurricanes, that he was training with him. So he is still training and staying in shape. These hockey players, they need to stay in shape. They can't just be couch potatoes and put on beer bellies and say, hey, let's put on the skates next week and be good to go. You take a look at what a lot of the players do. You look at what Ovechkin does. Kuznetsov's talked about training, and other Capitals players that they need to be in peak shape. So I guess what I'm trying to say is here, we can't assess where Kuznetsov is right now as a player. We know how he played last year. And if we want to take a look a little bit further back, how he was a couple years ago. But all we can hope for is that if the Capitals choose not to trade him, that he comes into camp a man on a mission, willing to prove to everyone around the NHL that I am that guy. And I'm going to help this Caps team in their pursuit of winning another Stanley Cup. I think that, we want change. And as Caps fans, we all want change. But let's have a come to Jesus moment here for a moment. We don't know what this team is going to look like under the next regime. I think to a certain extent, Caps fans, we take for granted this team and their ability to make it to the playoffs almost every single year. They missed the playoffs for the first time in quite some time last season, and you'd swear that this was the worst team in the NHL. It happens. There is changes. But before we get too excited, myself included here, about the future, let's just also remember the team that's playing right now, and that they are, most of the players on the team, the guys that won the Stanley Cup. This next regime, they're going to have to prove that they're capable of winning a cup, minus Ovechkin and Backstrom and Oshie and Carlson and all that. So for right now, it's concentrating on the task at hand. And the task at hand is next season, this team being competitive. I think that Brian McClellan could do a lot to help this team by making that big acquisition. I think this team could go a long ways by reassuring that Kuznetsov is needed on this team. Just based on those comments that I read to you there in that article, he seems kind of, this team doesn't really need me. So whether I'm here or whether or not, the team is going to be what it's going to be. That doesn't seem like a guy that's totally engaged with the team that he's playing with. Most players, when you hear them talk, they are passionate about the team that they're playing with. And you got to think that it kind of is an ego check that, there's a lot of talking heads, myself included, that, question what kind of player he is. And it's also a bit of an ego check to hear his own general manager, Brian McClellan, kind of questioning his future with this team. It's hard to get into the mindset and to go into camp and think to yourself, I'm going to try my hardest for this team that doesn't really seem that in love with me. So I think that it would be wise for Spencer Carbery to reach out to Kuznetsov if he hasn't already done so, and Brian McClellan, and say, hey, buddy, we need you on this team. We need you in this next step. I think small things like that just go a long ways. And I know that this is a macho, tough guy league, but sometimes it's the little things, reassuring someone that's, this big sports star, even the biggest sports stars, they need reassuring that they matter on the team that they're playing on. You don't want him to feel disconnected and just mailing it in. That is not the Kuznetsov that we're looking for. All right, here, a bit of a personal note here. Why I missed the show the last few days is my dad passed away. And I know this isn't probably the proper avenue to talk about it, but he died of an issue that he's had for the last while. He had colon cancer about 20 years ago, and's had issues surrounding that ever since. Complications, shall we say. So the other night, about 2:30 in the morning, I get a call from my dad. Of course, I didn't have the ringer on. And my brother answered the phone and brought him in. And the issue that he had massive bleeding, and they weren't able to stop the bleeding. His blood wasn't clotting, and they did everything they could do. And life support, I know I've been reached out to by a lot of Caps fans that are met, doctors and that kind of thing, just to let you know he was on like 6 different pressors, which are what control your blood pressure. They had never seen that what kind of life support. There were drips and ventilators and stuff all over the ICU. And at the end of the day, it wasn't enough. And so he passed, and it was a difficult decision to make. But when you look at someone and you realize that you got to do what's best for them, and even though that meant saying goodbye to my dad, that's what I had to do. And I don't mean to bum you guys out on the show here, but there's a lot of questions about where I was the last 3 days. And 46 years old, losing your dad. I'm not a spring chicken, I get that, but my mom passed in 2017. And my dad here the other day. So it is difficult. But anyway, thanks for all of you for reaching out here. And it means a lot to me to go through this tough time. But it's good to have a distraction in your life, right? And I don't mean to talk about this as a negative. I'm passionate about the Capitals, as you can tell. But sometimes it's good to have that distraction, right? So you don't think about things like this, because it's pretty negative. The world can be pretty negative out there, and it's good to have all you guys that reached out to me on social media. I appreciate it, but tough things to go through. Like I say, I'm 46, and I'm not exactly a young guy anymore. But to be 46 and be minus your mom and your dad is a bit of a difficult thing. So that's where I'm at. I just thought I'd let you guys know to close out the show. I didn't think it would be a good thing to talk about to start the show. But anyway, that is what I have for you today. And I thank you so much for joining me. And are you a fan of other DC sports? Well, Locked On has got you covered. We have Locked On Nationals, Commanders, and Wizards. So no matter what major DC sport it is, Locked On has got you covered. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.